And hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our PBBI lecture and talks that we try to do about one per week at the Portuguese Beyond Borders Institutes at California State University, Fresno. Welcome to all of you who are joining us here from the West Coast of the United States. Welcome to those who are joining us in different parts of the other states of the Union. So good evening or good night there. And welcome to those friends who always follow us in Hawaii, where it is a few hours, still middle of the afternoon. It is a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to have this young man as a guest. I've known him for a very long time. I've admired all of his commitment and his work on behalf of teaching music, on behalf of getting involved in an array of Portuguese events having to do with the popular culture, with, as I said, with music for many, many years. He trained many, and I would say hundreds of young boys and girls, now young men and women, to become members of the Portuguese marching band. He led that effort for many, many years. And for many years was also a way for our young people who didn't have the ability to be involved in music to do so at no cost. And so Manuel do Canto, welcome. Love the shirt, the Fresno State. So on behalf of Fresno State, thank you for promoting it. You do have a son that attends, Justin, a bright and wonderful young man who I've had the pleasure of accompanying to the Azores when he was in high school, and he went just a couple of years ago to do an internship. So welcome, Manuel.
Thank you very much. How are you doing, Dennis?
We're doing great. We're doing great. And so just to let everyone in on the topic I kind of picked was a generic one. It's an introduction to the Terceira Style Carnaval, an island celebration that journeyed to California, and indeed, it did. And Manuel, if you don't mind, before we start, we will of course dive into what is a dança and the different types of danças and bailinhos. But tell me a little bit, and everyone else, especially those who don't know you, a little bit about your involvement in Carnaval. I know you started at a very young age. I know you started, I believe, when your beloved parents were still alive. And so tell us a little bit about how Carnaval, which is Mardi Gras in English, but it is very different in the island of Terceira. And that's why we're doing this presentation, because many folks have gotten a hold of us. And now that the YouTube people can watch these things all the time from this year and prior years. And so tell us how you got involved or drawn in to the Carnival fever.
Well, the way I first started watching Carnaval as a kid, when my dad was involved in when we lived down in Artesia in California, Southern California. And I remember him on stage with friends, and at the time they had danças pandeiro, which was a tambourine danças. And I remember being sitting right there in front of the stage watching them and thinking how great it was. These guys were jumping up and doing their dancing, and the tambourine, the mesh had the tambourine, and the music was just so, it was so neat to me. And what we call the violon, which is our acoustic guitar, just the sound of that really attracted me to what was going on. So as a kid, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, I remember watching these. I finally became part of a dança de espada, which is what we call the sword dance, when I was 10. And I haven't been on every single year, but many, many years since then, which was 1982, I've done quite a few Carnaval pieces, whether it being in bailinhos or danças pandeiro or de espada. So that's how I got my start.
So it's fair to say that it's been part of your life, just from a very tender age, first, by watching your dad, and then actually by participating. Let's take a little bit of, one of the things, of course, about Carnival is when you participate, you know how it happens, and you know what happens, and you know what has to be done in order to have those 3 or 4 or 5 days come to fruition. And it has changed also in California. I'm of the time that we used to have Carnival for 3 months almost, at least for a couple. It started in January with all the different weekends, and now it's kind of concentrated basically in 1 or 2 weekends. But let's for reasons that we want to explain to people. You mentioned the different dances. So in Terceira, we should tell people that this is not an Azorian thing. So don't expect to go to the island of Corvo and see a dança de Carnaval. You might see some version, but Terceira is unique. It's a very unique. It has its roots. It's not to say that other islands haven't tried it on and off. There is historical information that other islands have done it, but year in, year out, other than the pandemic year, it's been a tradition in the island of Terceira. There's lots of different theories how we started, but what we used to call when I was a young man, which was quite a few years before you were a young man, in the island of Terceira, a dança do dia or a dança de espada. It used to be called just a dança de dia. We didn't see the pandeiro. We saw the sword. What constitutes a dança de espada? You participated in one when you were 10. I know that you've participated in others. Tell us a little bit about the concept of that, because as many people who asked me about it in the last few weeks have mentioned, and one person put it perfectly, it seems to be a very serious thing. And so it is not usually a comedy, it is not a skit, it's usually historic or fictional, but with this kind of a story to be told, usually a sad story, but that doesn't have to be the case. But tell us a little bit about Dança de Espada. What constitutes it, and what makes it unique in your perspective?
Well, typically a dança de espada is a drama, and like you mentioned, it could be maybe a period piece. It can be about kings and queens, or there's many danças done about royalty, Portuguese royalty, dramas, and it is typically a drama, although not always, because there were times where danças de espada were done that included a raton and was not a drama and a comedy, but for the most part, since a certain period, it became to where dança de espada was mainly a drama. And you have your puxador, which is the mestre, who has a sword, and typically 8 what we call dançarins on each side. And for the most part, it used to be to where it was always men. For many years, women did not participate in dança de carnaval. Not that they didn't want to, but it was just at the time, women were not maybe allowed, or parents, or the way society was, they didn't allow the women to be in carnaval. But getting back to the dança de espada, it was referred to as the dança de dia because usually in the daytime, when a dança de espada would perform in the street and in the daytime, so they would be also performed at times inside salons in the halls, but a lot of times they were outside, and many were sung back decades and decades ago. Many of them were sung, and much shorter than the dramas, the danças de espada of today, which usually typically go from 50 minutes to an hour. Back then, they would probably last a half hour to 40 minutes. So over the years, they've gotten longer and more involved in the writing and the writing style.
And so it's usually, as you said, a historical piece of a time frame, or a drama as far as a fictional character that like all good characters have lots of good attributes but have some flaws.
Right.
And explain to us the part of the dances. So when a dança usually starts, and let's take the espada, but they're all kind of generic the same way, in that they start with dancing. There's no singing, so there's a small part at the beginning that is just dancing. Explain to us that, and then as they transition to the singing, please.
Okay, so they'll start off with a masha. And a masha usually lasts anywhere between 3, 5, 6 minutes. And this is the time where they choreography on what we call passage. There's some passages that show the dançarins dancing and the mestre, like we say, pulling the dança. And After the masha, it goes into what we call the Suda song, which is a cantigas, which is sung, and it's all rhymed. Now, over the years, the rhymes have changed, where before a lot of it would be we called 6 rhymes lines, and then it became to 8, and then 16, 20, where they've become quite elaborate over the years. And that's one of the biggest differences, I think, in these dances nowadays compared to the old days. Cantigas or the Suda song or even the Chiclita, they've gotten much more elaborate, very sentimental. But so we have the Masha, it segues into the Suda song, which is the opening singing part. And then you have the assunt, which is the script, it's the acting part. There's also the moda of the assunt that basically explains what the title is and what may come about. And then they start the acting. And in between each scene, they'll have the modo do assunto, which explains either what happened in that scene or what's going to happen, give people kind of an idea. And once the assunto is over, typically 5 scenes is what makes the script. After the assunto is over, they have the modo de song, which is what we refer to the goodbye cantigas. And then at the end, it closes off with the masha again. So.
And this whole process nowadays, as you said, is usually anywhere between 50 some minutes to an hour, more or less.
Typically, yes.
Yeah. Typically, yes. And usually in danças de espada, so the swords, the dramas, many times or always, or enlighten us on that, the actors are not part of those duas filas, of those 8 now men and women usually that dance. They come on the stage when the script calls for them to come on the stage, correct?
When they're performing, yes, that's when you see them. And then when it's when that part is over, then it's just the dançarins. So it's serious, it's a drama, so we take these characters a lot more serious, whereas if it's a comedy, you see a lot of times the people who are within the script also as dançarins on the sides, either playing an instrument or dancing. So it seems like it's not as crucial to keep that component of that character. So yeah, they typically, and in the end, when they come to do their final bows and they come out again, which is normal, but typically they only are there for the assumed part, the script part of the dança.
The other part that you just kind of referred to is, so in the dança de espada, the instruments are not part of those 2 groups. In other words, they're not part of those of those 8 couples or a number of couples. They're not part of the actual performance. They're part of the performance, but not on stage. They're usually on the side of the stage or in front or somewhere, correct?
Right. The ones who play the masha, you may have anywhere between 12, 15, 16 musicians playing. Masha is like march. It's a march style, piece of music. And they typically are off to a side of the hall, to the corner of the hall playing. And then for the music, for the lyrics and the cantigas, you'll have your string instruments. Typically for a dança de espada is mainly string instruments. Typically, you might see a trumpet here and there with a muted, maybe a sax, but typically it's your bandolins, your mandolins, accordions, violins, and guitars is what you will find.
For the singing, but does the marcha involve also wind instruments or no? The marcha is
The masha is basically brass and woodwind instruments, yes.
okay. And so the one question that I had, which was and one can answer anyway, because when I mean can answer, things change. But one question said to me was that a lot of people notice that dança de espada, their costumes are very elaborate. Um, are they really more elaborate than usually a dança de pandeiro or a bailinho? Because we have seen dancers de pandeiro very elaborate as well throughout the years, but they're usually very classical style, the way that the bailarinos on both sides, men and women, and of course the mesters dressed up. Correct?
Right. Typically, they come out more refined, more. I'm not going to say tuxedo-like, but a more formal type of costume, and it's usually what we call uma dança bem vestida. It's they try to tailor them and make the costumes as well made and as elegant as possible for dança de espada. Not to say that other dancers don't come well dressed, because you see many, especially in Terceira, where there's many seamstress, and they have outstanding costumes, even for bailinhos and all that. But when it comes to a dança of espada, you'll see a lot of maybe full coats, full length coats, and the mesh come out, with nice big decorated hats, such, and so the dançarinos. So it is very, especially when you have those women who are so talented in what they do, and they bring that out, and it's a huge part of Carnaval. It really is.
So transitioning to the dança de pandeiro tambourine, and so those were sometimes were called dança da noite, although that the term has changed because everything has had its own natural evolution. But a dança de pandeiro is, in your perspective, how would you define that? And what are the major differences between that and a dança de espada?
Okay, well, now dança de pandeiro is comedy. It's comic. And which honestly is what a lot of people who are Carnaval connoisseurs really enjoy, because they're there for a laugh. They love to laugh, and so pandeiro, meaning tambourine, dança de pandeiro. What makes it a dança de pandeiro is you have to have the tambourine in it, and the guy, just like the espada, you have the mestre pulling the dancer with a sword. Now you have in a dança de pandeiro, the tambourine is the mestre, the tambourinist. And then for a dança de pandeiro, you normally have less people. Does it mean always? No, but for many years, I remember them just having 6 on each side as far as dançarinos, but it's grown to probably about the same size as dança de espada, to 8 on each side. And I think more so because of musicians. There's more and more musicians, so it's nice to have a few more on stage. Whereas it used to be to where a lot of these danças de pandeiro, the dance style was what we would call pelada. They were more of a higher type of dancing. So back then you'd probably have less men on stage dancing. But once the musicians became a huge part of even danças de pandeiro and bailes, they've grown in numbers.
So in the dança de pandeiro, it is typical now, and has been for many years, that the musicians are in. They're not on the side playing as in the dança de espada. They're part, and sometimes they're even also actors in the skits. Correct?
Correct. Yes. Nowadays, it's not uncommon to see somebody playing whatever instrument it is, and then a scene later he goes back and dresses. Now he's a character, and wears many hats during one dança performance. It's pretty impressive. Some of these kids have lots of talent. Some of these men who've been doing it for years, but you see a lot of that more nowadays, and even the number of actors, where before you may have 4 or 5 actors, now you may have 10 people who actually have speaking parts, so and the size, the length of dança de pandeiro have also grown in bailinhos, because of the writings over the years has gotten more elaborate. So seems everything's gotten a little bit bigger, from the number of people on stage to the time of the actual scripts. Everything's grown over the years.
Now, you're much younger than I am, but do you still remember the ratão? Was that something that you
Oh
still?
yeah, yes, the ratão. So back when there's time to the raton, scripts from what I understand, what I was told, back in the years ago in Terceira, much smaller scripts. And what would happen is you would have a little script or a play being played out, and the raton was the one who came in and finished everything, and he really had all the mostly the funny lines to end that scene. And maybe something that not typically said by just anybody, he had maybe some lines with a little bit what we would call a little bit more pepper. And so, but over the years, and the raton basically went away. They don't use them as much because of the script getting longer and each character having more and more to say. So all that gets spread out amongst different characters. But the raton probably was a thing until, oh geez, maybe into the 90s, you know. After that time, you kind of saw him go away. Every once in a while, there may be a dancer that's kind of like what we call a throwback.
Mhm.
We will see that. But for example, Chino came with a kids dancer, and as a matter of fact, it had two ratons. So in a way, it was a little throwback to how things used to be done, and they performed that, and it was very nice to see. But nowadays, you don't see it very often at all. Yeah.
And so if we look at Carnaval and Terceira, and I don't even know this year, I mean, there were, I believe, over 60 danças, bailinhos, comédias, as they call it, comedy skits, because they're included in this number. Some even just plain monologues, as you know, that were included in this. But would it be safe to say that the majority of what happens nowadays, whether it be in Terceira Island or in the diaspora, and mainly in the East Coast, California, and a little bit, not as much as it once was, but still a few of them in the Toronto area.
Mhm.
Is it safe to say, Manuel, that most of the performances and the groups nowadays are bailinhos?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Danças in California, we didn't have any this year. And we haven't had many, to tell you the truth. Now in Terceira, you see one here and one there. There was one from I believe Toronto, Canada, that
That's right.
went this year. Um,
And then there was one from Porto Judeu that I saw, Vasco Daniel, that was actually my student here many years,
yes, he
was
was
there.
the master of that dancer. Wrote his own cantigas. So yeah, there's maybe three, maybe four. I'm not sure of the exact count, but when you compare that number, three or four, to the 60, almost 60 that you mentioned, yeah, that's mainly what it is nowadays, is bailinhos. And even dança pandeiro, it seems like there isn't as many puxadores or mesh pandeiro as there used to be. There still are, but it seems like the majority of these are bailes nowadays. Yeah.
And explain that a little bit to us, of the bailinho, because in a dança de pandeiro, the tambourine player, the leader, of the dance, the mestre, is the one that does all the singing, basically.
Correct.
He or she in this case, because we have seen also with two people. Correct me if I'm wrong, but some
Yes.
we've seen with those mestres of puxarem pandeiro in the past,
Yes.
both men and women, and
Mhm.
so they're the ones that do the singing. In
Mhm.
the bailinho, does it open up more opportunities if you have more voices that like to and are good at it, or what's
Yeah.
what's the concept behind it, in your thoughts?
Well, it could be more than one reason, but it could be that nobody wanted to pull a bailing for that year. And then so you have maybe three or four people who are willing to sing what we call a cantiga, come up and sing a cantiga, and they find out, hey, I really like to do this. And others want to give it a try. So now in the baile, there could be a maestro with a varinha, which is basically like a conductor's baton in
Mhm.
essence. So that is bailinho puxada with a varinha. Um, and then there's also some that there's no mestre at all, And like you mentioned, they come up and sing their typically 5 cantigas for the so the song in despedida, and they go about it that way. It's been actually really neat to see, because what they're able to do nowadays, groups of say it in here, when you have you don't have just one singer, you get 2 singers up there. Now you have ability to maybe harmonize a song and sing cantigas in a certain way that you really can't do with one person. So it's been getting very creative, and it's really neat to see what different groups do with the talent that they have. Very interesting.
When you said a few minutes ago, the typical 5 cantigas, is that kind of a rule that everyone follows, or what is, or is there a number between 5 and 6, or between 5 and 7, or is there some kind of a rule that people try to follow?
Well, it's kind of funny, because when we say rules, and in Carnaval, there's no rules, but there's lots of rules. So it's something that throughout the many decades, it seems like that was a magical number. There would be 5 cantigas. And then, depending on the style or what they want to achieve. But nowadays, it's not necessarily the case. Many people still do that, but it seems like they maybe have stretched out each single cantiga to put more context into a cantiga, more meaning into each one, to deliver a more broader message, or to pinpoint a message, however they want that cantiga to flow. So if they're getting longer, that means you might need less cantigas. Instead of having 5, 4 may do, 3 may do. It all depends on the length of the cantiga, the length of the chorus coming behind, because you have the cantiga and the chorus. So it all depends on what the groups nowadays decide to do. But back years ago, 5 seemed to be the magic number on that.
And is that for the solo song and the despedida, for the intro and the farewell?
Right, for the
Right.
intro and the farewell. For the assunt, which is the script song, you would have the introduction to the assunt, which would be 1, and then to wrap it up at the end when it was over, that would be 2. So 2 cantigas for the assunt.
Now, let's talk about a little bit. I think that, and I appreciate your time, Manuel, immensely, and I think it's important for people to know this. And this will, of course, be part of our archive at Fresno State, and so hopefully, your grandchildren can watch it, or your great grandchildren, 50 or 60 or 80 years from now. And hopefully there'll still be danças everywhere. The Portuguese, the Azorian diaspora, I should say, and it's kind of interesting, and that is one of the questions I want to ask you about, but about Azorian versus Terceira when it comes to the communities, when it comes to overseas, when it comes to the diaspora. But all of this is done, and I'd like you to explain that a little bit. All of this is done in rhyme. In other words, the songs, of course, as you mentioned, when they would go, and they're now longer, but they still rhyme. Maybe the first 3 would say. I mean, there's a connection there. There's many ways to rhyme, as our folks who are watching also know. But they rhyme, and the representation, the actors themselves, there's rhyming there. And does it explain to us a little bit? So in other words, if you're playing one part, for example, and you're dança, and Joe Rocha is playing another part, okay, and you kind of intertwine, it doesn't mean that you have to rhyme all 4 times. You could do one part of the rhyme, and he does another part of the rhyme. So can you run through that a little bit, both the singing part and the acting?
Okay, as far as the rhyme, yes, everything is rhymed, and that's what makes it a very Terceira style carnaval, because I don't know of anybody else's carnaval that has anything like this. So the cantigas are all rhymed, which of course makes things a little bit more difficult, and these people like Joe Roach and many others, El Costa, and so many who write Asunción cantigas, it's quite a talent, to be able to make a point and maybe hit at some heartstrings of the audience about things, about things that are going on nowadays. All that is done in rhyme, which cannot be easy. And that's why these cantigas nowadays are so appreciated. It's probably one of the highlights nowadays. Besides of course, the music is something, the assunto is something, the script, but the cantigas seems to have really taken off within the last 5-10 years. And also the assunto, like you mentioned, is also rhymed. Each character interacting with another character is doing so in a rhyme. So if I'm maybe by myself and I have 5, 6, 7, 8 rhymes, that's all a pattern to that. Now, if I'm interacting with another character, maybe has 2 or 3 lines, or maybe even one, but that's rhyming with what I have to say down the road. So it takes quite a big effort and some talent to put all that and still falling within a rhyme, excuse me, a rhyme pattern, which is very neat.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. As far as the acting part, okay. The singing part, singers are used to singing in rhyme. Doesn't always happen, There's, of course, different kinds of even prose poetry, but in singing, it's kind of something that then, of course, you as a musician will write the music that can pair up to that metric. But people don't talk in rhyme. So when you're an actor, whether you're acting, on a soap opera or a feature film, um, is it easier, or I would assume, and from what I've seen, and my dad did him when he was younger, and he was always would tell me, and the Azores not here obviously, but he would always tell me that it's double the work because you're trying to be a decent actor, rhyming, which is something that people normally don't do. So it's twice the work, he used to tell me, to bring forth that message genuinely in a rhyme that is also genuinely a person doing his or her role. Your thoughts?
Yes, exactly. It's I mean, on everyday conversation, we do not rhyme. When you're watching a movie or a play, it doesn't rhyme. This is very, very dense. And does it make it harder? Yeah, it does when you're practicing, and because if you miss that rhyme, it may throw you off for a little bit there. So what you try to do is cover into you keep it rolling. You try not to stop, which tends to happen sometimes. We're not all perfect, but with the rhyme, it can make it tougher, but at the same time, it may make it easier. For example, if you're on stage and you're not sure what your next line is going to be, but you listen to the last couple of lines of the actor before you, you're like, okay, I know where I'm at now. And then here we go. So it has its moments, give and take. So it could be harder, but it has its advantages also.
Is it easier from your perspective? Not that may even be the wrong word, but I think you'll get the gist of what I'm trying to ask. Is it easier if it is a comedy, like Bailinho or Danças Bandeiro, where even if you don't rhyme, you can come up with something. If you've been doing this for a while, you can come up with something, even if it doesn't, as we say in Portuguese, mesmo que não rime, mas encosta.
Right.
Then in a dança de espada, where, there's not much improvisation that can be done to lighten up the crowd that way.
Right. No, I think you're right. And the crowd, they're good. They're very good about it because they notice crowds are very savvy, and they've been watching Carnival for many years. They know when somebody's tripped up. And as a matter of fact, sometimes they applaud and appreciate the moment. And they appreciate how people can get in and out of those situations also. Um, for example, we have Dennis Rodriguez here in our local in Tulare dancers, that Grupo Carnavalesco de Tulare. He does a very good job at doing that, and he gets around. Sometimes something doesn't come to mind, but he's very good at filling those in, and the crowd already knows. So, and there's many people who do that to a lesser extent, but Does it go easier in a danza pandeiro or in a comedy? Absolutely. Yes, it goes. Now, when you're doing a drama and everybody's so hooked into making sure that everything's flowing just right, it may be a little tougher pill to swallow if your dialogue doesn't come out correctly. Yes.
One question just to return to the ratão. Since there is no ratão, that by the way, I saw that translation, which is something I do, as you know, in a literary aspect, and I saw one in Terceira that I didn't have the heart to tell the people that they shouldn't have done what they did. Translated it to big rat, and sometimes, that's not what he is or she. It came from actually the Gil Vicente, according to the specialists, theater, and from Shakespeare, it was the court jester, the guy who was, made people laugh, in royal in the monarchies. But without the Raton, who's pretty much was responsible for a lot of for the punchline, let's put it this way. I mean, he or she, it was mostly a he at that time, had to come up with something. I mean, or the writer had to put that major punchline in there, because that was the big laugh. If the whole scene seems like, if it had, two or three parts and there was very little laughter, it was really on him to come up and to end that well. Without the ratão, is there a bit more pressure, on the actors, or is there a bit more laughter that goes on throughout the whole scene instead of waiting for the punchline at the end? Is there a punchline at the end? Is another way of asking, even without the ratão.
It depends on how it's written. Maybe the person writing it wants to feature that cartão. If you have a person who really knows how to deliver those lines well, he's going to write to the forte of the people in the dança. If he knows who are in there, if he knows, well, we have this cartão and this guy is great and he can deliver this, well, they're going to make sure that they write those for him. But there is times where other actors carry their weight very well on stage, so it can be kind of a combination of things. Me personally, I only was part of maybe 2 or 3 dances total that had a ratão in it. And by those days, things were written already kind of mixed into where it involved more people besides the ratão. But yeah, I think whoever's writing it will write to the strength of the ratão, if that's the case. And maybe a reason why they had the ratão saying his punchlines too. Sometimes things were in a hidden message too. It wasn't a direct thing. It was said in a hidden way, because years ago in Portugal, you couldn't just write whatever you wanted. As you're aware, they had to take the whole script and have the government, the censura they called it, check and make sure there is nothing that spoke ill of the government of the day. So maybe a ratão, if he delivered certain what we call piadas without disclosing exactly what he was saying, just kind of get the gist. And other times it was just to end the assumed, or excuse me, each scene, to kind of finish that up. So there's various ways where how things were written and delivered.
Yeah, indeed. And then it reminds me of a story, because as I said, my dad, before he came to the United States at the age of 38, he had already, years ago, it was different in Portugal. When you were like 38, you didn't do a lot of dances. It was when you were younger, and his work didn't permit, but he told me I will always carry this, and I've actually told my children, and hopefully, and my grandchildren. He was part of quite a few dances when he was younger. I mean, and of a dança da noite, or pandeiro, and they one time did 2 different assuntos, not completely, but they had 2 different piadas. So they would go to a freguesia, and of course, people have to remember, this is before, we're talking about I was born in 1958, and this was around even before I was born. So this is 1950s. When the censura, when the dictatorship was in its flourishing, and before most people had cars or public transportation of buses, and so people either walked or they went on a carriage or somewhere. So it's not like if you were from Praia, you went to do a dance at Teatro Angrense. Most people stayed within the 2 or 3 or 4 villages where you could walk or go, in a especially in the 1950s, in the horse and buggy, or a cart, an ox cart, etc. And so it wasn't like they were doing 20 performances in one night. Obviously, they were just doing maybe 5 or 6 or even less. But they would go to an actual freguesia and they would say, "Is there anybody here from the Pete?" And people knew each other. Those of us who know the Azores, especially the Azores of that time, some of these freguesias, were 400 people or 500. So they said, no, there's nobody here from Pete. So they would roll out, they would take a chance and roll out all those piadas, as you said. Other dancers, they would arrive, and he was even telling me one time he arrived in the area Casa de Ribeira, and they asked, and they said, "There's a few families here that we don't know if they're involved or not," and they just did that straight one without any piadas, any kind of criticism towards the government, because it would land you in jail.
It would land you in jail, which is now you look, and I think half of theirs, well, not half, but many of their bailinhos and assuntos are in regards to piadas and commenting on government. So just probably another reason why assuntos are so more elaborate nowadays, because there's so much you can talk about. And even here, we do things maybe in regards to sitcoms that we see on TV, or to a movie, or to which they do in Terceira. Terceira, they have a lot of American influence, European influence on what they write and the music they sing. So it's really exploded in the last couple decades, really.
Indeed. Let's talk a little bit about something that you mentioned in the beginning, which was the vestuário, or the costumes. I mean, most of the dancers, even the ones, not just the ones here, of course, but the ones in other parts of the United States and Canada, in the diaspora, but also in Terceira, they're not organized by an organization. They're usually sometimes organized by an organization of people that have been doing Grupo X, Y, or Z, and sometimes a group that's just made for that one year. It may not be the same group as in Terceira. For the next year, they move around quite a bit. But so not a lot of this, or what goes on from these elaborate costumes at a dança de espada, all the way to the ones that may not be as elaborate but still costly at a dança de pandeiro. This is all done by the group and by the people who do it out of their pockets, correct?
Well, yes, I don't have too much of a know on how they do it there in Terceira. But I'm sure that they have seamstress who work not just for people or the groups in their freguesia, as into other freguesias. I do hear that they are costly, and it's a lot of it gets expensive. But how they go about, I would assume that they speak to somebody that's been doing it probably for years and years, and they know basically how to dress the danza. But I really can't comment too much on how it is here. I know how we do it here.
And here, basically, again, it's not a danza done by organization X, Y, or Z that says to you and to Joe and to your team that runs your danza, saying, "Here, Manuel, here's we have $12,000 for you to spend on this year's danza, so here you go."
In that regard, no, I'm sorry. In that regard, no, what we do is everybody pays for their own clothing out of pocket, their own bus trips out of pocket. The time spent, it really is, you really have to love it, because if you don't, after a year or two, it gets pretty tiring. But we've had our group 29 years, and we've had a lot of the same faces. Before it was the parents, now we have a lot of our children in it, and grandchildren are coming about now. So it's people who really enjoy it, but there's no money to be made in Carnaval. It's an expense, quite of an expense. So here, I would say in the average, probably anywhere between $200 to $300 for clothing, depending on the year. And then you have your bus tickets, and that we pay our own busway. And then you have the halls too. The halls are you know, supportive. They open up their doors, but you need many people, many hands there, helping out the halls for the night, you know. So with Carnaval for the groups, in terms of the groups, yeah, there's not much to be made. Now, when groups were going before Carnaval, like for example, if they had a dança de espada, if they had a group or triage of a threesome of a bailinho, a dança de pandeiro, and maybe or a kids dança and a dança de espada, then you already had enough within your own group to go a few weeks before Carnaval and perform, and that you know, that becomes quite an expense with dança de espada and all that. So people would charge at the door. You know, these groups would charge, which in the past, when we had a full group like that, espada and everything, we would charge at the door to help recoup some of that cost, you know. And many groups did that who had big groups like the San Jose dancers that used to come down, o Grupo Cultural de São José, Chino, Artesia had some in the past, and you know, they do that in order to try to minimize all the expenses. So, but when nowadays we've been mainly having just for weekends of Carnaval, and typically there's no charge. Carnaval has mainly been free for the weekend of Carnaval.
What are your thoughts on that? Do you think people should pay? I mean, we pay for everything. We pay for everything that we go see. I mean, you know, well, we pay $75 to go eat crab.
Yeah.
You know, or we pay, obviously we pay because we were helping out, all not just eat crab. But I'm just saying we pay for every, it seems like we pay for everything other than the Espírito Santo festas when there's a cantoria and everything else, but they have their fundraisers. They have ways to fundraise because you're asking people to donate in the name of a divinity that people will, and it's part of our culture. However, should Carnaval go back to the, I don't know about going back to that old time where it was, you know, as you mentioned, because I remember that. I remember when when I got here to the United States and a few of the dancers started popping up, especially in the 1970s. Um, they it wouldn't be during Carnaval. It was always, you know, it started late January, you know, with some of the dancers from Artesia or San Jose or even Turlock, and every weekend there was one, and every weekend at that time I remember it was like $2, but my dad would pay those $2 every week to go see all of them. And
Mhm.
so should that be something? Because I don't know how many you know, as you said, you have a wonderful group and you have, you know, kids and now grandkids, but is it something that in the future might be a possibility or no?
Well, if they do it like it was done before, where they would go in January and start performing, then I'm sure anybody who would do that would probably start, you know, still charge at the door, because it is quite an expense. Now, as far as the weekend of Carnival, um, it's one of those lines where
Yeah.
it's a tough call, because there's many factors going into that. But we did see this year, with our group, with our local groups here, it was very, very hard getting transportation, just getting transportation. And if you did get transportation, it's pretty
Costly.
expensive. It's gotten quite expensive. So if this continues, will it hurt how many people want to participate in Carnival? It might. Um, do we start charging at the door? Will it cause even less people to stay home and not attend, which is how has already been a problem, because as nice and as great as social media has been and YouTube, it's fantastic. But sometimes people for Carnival would rather stay home and watch from the comfort of their own living room, which lately it's been good to where they've been posting it after Carnival, so that helps. But we have noticed less people attending the halls. This year was no exception. We saw less people this year than we have in the recent years. So that's a scary thing,
Yeah.
because you can have still people willing to participate in Carnaval and do Carnaval, but if there's nobody watching, the audience is just as much a part of Carnaval as the people performing. So it's one of those fine lines. Do we charge? Do we say, okay, we're going to start charging $5, $10 and then distribute this among the groups to help? I don't know the answer to that. If that would help, if it would benefit, it probably would in one area, it might not in the other. I don't know. So
it's going to be interesting times the next few years. I would think in the next, and as a matter of fact, thank you to your group and Margaret for answering the questions that we put forth to all the different groups. We had 3 of them answer, and I appreciate that. And that was one of the things that Margaret, answered on behalf of the group, which is indeed the low attendance that has happened throughout, the last, especially the last half a dozen years. Let's go back to the HEMA, because as you probably know, I'm sure you watch a lot of Carnaval. Although you're busy, you just can't sit. You don't have the luxury of sitting at home and watching Carnaval 6 or 7 hours a day. But I'm sure that you keep in touch with everything that is going on in the Azores and Terceira Island. And it seems like this year, what I've seen, what I've heard, what I've read, there was actually an excellent interview that was done on RTP about Carnaval. One of the PhDs that has a doctorate in popular customs in Terceira, Assunção Melo, married to a great musician, Rui Melo, who also is involved in Carnaval, who I believe lives in Biscoitos, but originally is from the Raminho Altares area. And Assunção, in this wonderful interview about the history of Carnaval, was talking about that, exactly what we have talked about before, which is more and more groups not doing the rhyme. And some people, there's people on both sides of the fence, obviously. And some people said, well, it's just a natural evolution. We had a evolution, from the raton to this to that. There's this evolution. What are your thoughts on it?
okay, I'm sorry, Dennis. Thoughts on what part here now?
Thoughts on the part of the Carnaval not rhyming.
Oh, not rhyming. Okay.
Not rhyming,
Gotcha.
because we had, I'm sure you saw some last year and even this year, and it seems, I don't know if it's a growing trend. I don't have the data, so I can't say, hey, there's more groups not rhyming, but there definitely are groups not rhyming. Whether, there were only 10 of the 50, some, I don't know. I don't have the hard data to share with anybody. It'd be interesting to actually see, but I saw some things that they were not rhyming. What are your thoughts on Carnaval rhyming and not rhyming?
Well, my thought is what put Carnaval de Terceira on the map was rhyme. And that is something that is so beautiful. Things do change in Carnaval. Music's changed, scripts have changed. But I think that one nucleus about Carnaval is the rhyme. And the fact that it's worked, because like you mentioned earlier, in everyday life, we don't rhyme when we talk. People are interested in watching something that's played out in rhyme is just, it's very intriguing. It's interesting. And I think it lasted all these years for a reason, because while a lot of other stuff changed quite a while ago, that maintained its focus, and it still does. Is this just an experiment by these groups attempting to do this? Maybe is it a lack of maybe somebody writing their scripts? I don't know, but I'm okay with people trying different things, and I'm not going to say it's a Carnaval rule that it has to be done this way, because there is no rules. But at the same time, for me personally, I'd much rather watch something that's rhymed on stage and seeing people interpret their work around rhyme, and see how these people put these assuntos together, because it's different. It's not like your plays, your community plays, your movies. It's, you have basically 5 scenes. How do you organize this so that it flows, so that it has a beginning, a middle, and an end? It ties in. It's interesting, so I like sitting there and watching, first listening to a title here's the title. I go, okay, I wonder what this is. Is it going to go this direction, like this? So it's already sprouting some curiosity. And then how they lay out their scenes. And then the other part is how they are able to rhyme, because even though it's rhyme, there's different styles of rhyming. You know, for many, many years, you had quadras and in rhyme. And then L.U. Costa came along and just revolutionized the way Carnaval was rhymed. It was more invasive, which there may have been invasive before, but his style was more of a quick, not so much this person speaking, now this person speaking, is more of an interactive, quicker interactive style of rhyme. And it worked so well. Now, I've seen a couple of the ones that are not rhymed, and to me, it seems like something is lacking. Something is not right. Does it mean I'm right? No. That's depends on
Sure.
somebody's preference. But I think Carnaval, especially Carnaval de Terceira, rhyme has a lot to do with what we have. Yeah.
You mentioned, and as a musician, of course, you have, I know, accompanied us for the last 20 plus years, almost 30 now, 29. The evolution in the music. It used to be like I recall as a young man that every single Carnaval group, if there was a top song by Marco Paulo, it would be in that music would be in every single Carnaval group, and I'm exaggerating, obviously, in every single, but you would see it in three or four, groups. It seems like a catchy tune that had come out by a famous singer, pop singer in Portugal, would be used in one way or another. To me, it seems like today, here and there, obviously, there's a lot more originality. I mean, as even a few years ago, as you may recall, the SPA, the Sociedade Portuguesa de Autores, was cracked down on using copyrighted material, music, in Carnaval, and they went back and forth with, and it wasn't totally respected, and it will never be, because it's a people's theater. However, what are your thoughts on the evolution of the music? Is there a lot more creativity now than just repetition of what used to be maybe 3-4 decades ago?
The music is it's changed so much. I remember hearing recordings of groups back in Terceira in the 80s. And honestly, there was maybe it was just the recordings I was receiving. I was like, oh, wow, this, it didn't seem like it was too fantastic. And they always had great musicians and everything. But moving on into the 90s and the 2000s, the younger generation just, I believe they had more musical education, going through school and the conservatorium. And then they started getting into different music, and you see great musicians there, awesome musicians. It seems like so many people playing music, trying to, learn, and so they can be in Carnaval. That's all great. A lot of really neat music. And then there's some music that that seems like it really doesn't have a very good place in in Carnaval. Although we do here too, we go get different styles of music too, but there's still a direction that you kind of want to stay within Carnaval music. But even here, we play different stuff. But the musicianship has improved a lot, and it is so neat seeing people playing more and more. And when you see these groups, especially with string musicians, bailinhos, and guitars, and of course accordions, and that is beautiful. And I think that's something that we need to focus more on, is getting that style of music. Over here we use what we have. We have a little bit of everything, but I think we need to make an effort to get more people into strings and instruments like that. But has it changed a lot? It's nice seeing all this change and all this different music, but sometimes it does seem like kind of goes overboard, in my opinion. You know, there's certain type of music that's, you know, just because you're able to play it, you know, maybe it doesn't fit quite right into Carnival style. But then again, there's no rules and it's just an opinion. So
Sure, but you think the evolution, and there's all across, but the evolution has been in the quality of the musicians that has improved tremendously, and more musicians,
yes,
quantity and quality in the last
yes.
couple of decades.
Without a doubt, without a doubt. Not to disrespect or say there was not quality musicians back, because there's great musicians back then. It just seems like there's more of them at this point in time. So that to me is very neat, very exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, and as you said, it has a lot to do with music education, and it's not that there weren't great musicians, 40 or 50 years ago, but 50 years ago people couldn't afford to go to the conservatory, or they couldn't, or they wouldn't, unless you went to a philharmonica, you didn't know how to read music, you just was playing by what you heard. And so now there's lots, as you know, there and here, lots of young men and women who go through, schools, whether it be the philharmonicas there still to continue to be the great schools for music. Music education, unfortunately, the schools is not the same thing as it is here, and here, of course, because of our schools. One other question, which before we let you go, and thank you so much for doing this for us, and thank you so much for participating. But a couple of other thoughts, and one question was, when we say Carnaval de Terceira in Terceira, and we talked about that in the beginning, but here really in the United States, both coasts, California and of course Massachusetts and Rhode Island, and then in Toronto, it really may have started with Terceira dancers, and that wonderful, that's the picture that you sent me of the 1920s. But the second phase, let's put it this way, because there were things, it's same thing as the bullfights and all that. There were things here and things there. But that second phase that began really in California in the 1960s, and the East Coast about the same time as well, and Toronto, the it has always been, it's more Azorian than it is only Terceira, because you see a lot of young men and women in these groups. Well, you see a lot of them that were born here, they're American or they're Canadian. But besides that, those who were not even born here, or those who were born here, but their parents or their grandparents came from São Jorge or Pico or Fayal, or so have we kind of made it an Azorian thing here in the United States, from your perspective, and especially in California, or is it strictly people from Terceira still? I mean, probably the majority, but do you see more involvement from people from other islands?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's people in our group that are from, you know, at least maybe both grandparents or both set of grandparents, or maybe from a different island. And but I think a lot what transcends people going from one island or being from one island to uh going into Carnaval is maybe they're musicians, and then musicians get involved. Well, I know how to play this. Well, then all of a sudden they want to start playing for a dance with Carnaval, and it seems like music lends to bringing in more people, um, and they do a great job. There's people, as you know, who come and watch Carnaval who are from Continent, and
Mhm.
they adore Carnaval. So it's mainly a Terceira thing, and Carnaval took off in Terceira the way it is, how it is now, and it's just amazing. But it's mainly Terceira people. But here in California, there's, you know, we have people from Peak, we have people from São Jorge, and who are involved. We have people from Fayal. So more and more islands are joining in. So it seems like now, as long as you like it, even if you're not from the islands, we have a kid who's part Portuguese, but you know, he really didn't know very much about Carnaval at all until he married somebody who is in the group, and now he's enjoying it. So we have a couple of guys who are mainly English speakers who really enjoyed it, and they've seen it from afar. They, you know, maybe like some of your audience members see it on YouTube, And they're like, oh, okay, well, that's pretty interesting. That's neat. And then they become part of a group. And then when they see what it takes to put all this stuff together, they're like, oh, wow. So how does this work? And where's this lead? What do we do? And then they kind of get that hook and they're like, kind of addicted to it. So it's pretty neat to see that.
Let's talk about the elephant in the closet or whatever we might want to call it, but as the problem with the community speaking and now looking at our carnival in California, which is the same thing that is having issues in Massachusetts, Rhode Island. It's nothing new there, and even in Toronto, where there's been less and less dancers. I mean, really a dramatic change in the number of dancers in the Toronto area from 25 years ago to today, according to people that I've spoken with. But the issue of the language. So, how do you see this, 10, 20 years from now? As the actors get older, I mean, I remember when the actors I see today were in their 20s. They're no longer in their 20s. And they spoke Portuguese because they spoke Portuguese at home with their parents, or they had come from there, a few of them. What are your thoughts on that? I think that most groups, including yours, of course, have done a wonderful job in getting young people, young men and women, to sing, in Portuguese. But it's easier to sing, and correct me if I'm wrong though, but do correct me. But I think it's easier to sing, a quadra or two, than it is to perform, to do a whole five scenes or be part of those five scenes. So how do you see this in terms of, unfortunately, not having a lot of younger immigration? The Chino group had, one of the best carnival people from Terceira come, and so he's kind of he could do the dance a lot by himself, because he's kind of a star in that before he immigrated to the United States. But there's not a lot of immigrants. There's a few of them. We know a couple of them in the Hillmar area, especially. Len Yu hasn't been here that long, and a couple others in those groups. But what are your thoughts on that as far as getting the younger people who are, who have been, from my perspective, and this is a personal opinion that I'm interjecting, who have been God sent in the aspect of saving and actually adding and to the music, because they're all great musicians. They've all got, wonderful training. They're talented, and even to the singing. But then let's go into the acting part. There are a few, and I see a few of them in your group, more and more. How do you look into the future of that? What's your? I mean, nobody has a magical, ball to look into, crystal ball. But what are your thoughts?
Well, that's definitely a concerning aspect of Carnaval going to the future. One we already touched on, and that's the audience members. The other one is, of course, the Portuguese language and people speaking the Portuguese, because the style of Portuguese that we use here in Canada, it's very Terceira style. And it's like what we call squat, the Terceiro. It could be a specific freguesia, and that is
How
used.
much we sing a little bit when we talk in Terceira.
Yes, and
Kind of a natural for Carnaval.
it's very natural. It's the way they used to speak there. Their language has changed there a lot with this younger generation having more schooling and they're speaking, more proper. But I grew up in a different era, listening to my parents speak, and we spoke at squat frente. My mom's from Altar, my dad's from Scout, and we had our very distinct way of pronouncing things. And it seems like that's what kind of fit into Carnaval and to the dialogue and, how our assumptions were. Now, with the younger generation, albeit even if they speak the Portuguese, they say pronounce the words correctly and all that, it's a different tone. It's because they never spoke that way. You can't expect them to speak in a way that they have never spoken before. So is it one of those things that will change in Carnaval and we'll accept? I don't know. But it seems like it is a little bit concerning because we have less people speaking the language fluently. So it is concerning going forward who is going to be able to pull it off so that they can speak enough Portuguese to do these parts because number one, it's not easy just learning the language. Number two, utilizing it in a way that's delivered. It's another it's technical, technical in a way for them, not for the ones who used to do before, because they're just
Sure.
speaking like they spoke. But for the newer crowd coming in, it's different. So that's going to be a challenge going forward.
Another challenge that we might want to talk about, or may not be a challenge, and again, correct me, is the writing. I mean, your group has been fortunate because you've had an in-house writer of the group, and but there's aren't many folks in the diaspora in California and in the East Coast. I mean, there's Victor Santos, as you know, and a couple others. There's one or two also in Canada. Actually, they've had quite a few there too, but it's not it's not something that is a lot of the Asuntos. And many years ago, and I'm talking prior to your group, even in 35 years ago, many of the students were just replications of what had happened in Terceira the year before, or then they started. Then in the last 30 years is when they basically been writing, but from Terceira and bringing it here. My thoughts, and this is purely not any kind of criticism to anybody, because anybody who writes is fine. I mean, as you said, no rules, but there are rules. However, I think that it wouldn't be the same Carnaval in Terceira if it was written by someone in Braga that has never seen or wasn't part of the Carnaval, or even if they have dancers to Carnaval. And so I think one of the issues that has grown and has always been part of your group has been that you deal with issues that are pertinent to the community because it's written by someone who lives here, who knows how the community is, what the community will take, what the community may not take, nobody's perfect, will make a mistake, maybe thinking this is going to be funny, it's not, and vice versa. Well, I'm going to write this line, but it's not funny. And then it's the funniest line, the whole thing. However, I've always thought that we needed to grow, our own, and we have, with in your group, but you're kind of an exception. There's not many other people writing for Carnaval in California. How do you see that in the future? Because the younger generation will have to have a lot more relevancy, and the relevancy that has been given to your group has been because it is written by someone here in the community, which is a Rocha. So, what are your thoughts on importing assuntos versus writing them here?
Well, it definitely makes it to where you're making it more custom. In our case, Joe's been writing for our group for his first one I want to say was probably in 2010, if I'm not mistaken. So since 2010, he's been writing for our group, and it is just so. Besides the fact that he really knows what he's doing, Joe's great at writing. It really makes it custom to, okay, we know who we have, and we can write for this or that, and write what's going around here, or Joe will write. Will it make it harder for other groups who get their material, their assuntos from Terceira? They've been doing that for years, and at a time we used to do the same. We used to get our assuntos from Elio Costa and a couple from other people. What will happen here in California?
Did you have to customize it a little bit when they came from other area from Manuel?
There were certain things that we would have to change. Yeah. Either we would ask for it to be emendado, or if it's something that was minor that we can change, or Joe would be able to fix certain things to make it to what we needed. But your question was
My
basically
question
they
is
far
not enough people writing in California.
not in California,
Mhm.
but at a time there was not people in California writing. So it's been something that we've pretty much dealt with for a long, long time, because most all these groups now and back then would get their assuntos from Terceira, and they continue to do so. Ours in our situation, we're lucky enough that Joe writes it for us, and he has written it a few here and there for other groups a few times. Um, but yeah, as long as there's people writing in Terceira, that's what you need. And it seems like there's more and more people writing, so that's a good thing.
And there's some that it's interesting that there are some that will write the assuntos but don't write cantigas. They don't, and some are just write cantigas. My good friend Alan Oliveira only writes cantigas. He very, doesn't do assuntos. But so there's some people that like to do one thing versus another, and then some do, of course, from beginning to end. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
One quick thing: how do we archive what we have? And that is one question. I mean, you have, as you said, Joe has been writing for you, for what, a dozen years at least, for the group, for your group. Here's the group here from Tulare, and has written for others. I think that I know that your cousin Robert has Roberto has a lot of things that are archived, but I'm just it's always affects me, especially since I've taken on this role at Fresno State, which is, how do we archive all of this? Because we go back to things that are simple that we take for granted today, but nobody can tell us, for example, how the very first queen started. How did that become? No, there's stories. There's like at least a half a dozen versions, but nobody can pinpoint basically, and it's because we haven't done what we maybe should have done, archiving some of the things. I know that you had mentioned to me as we were starting our conversation that your group really tries to archive everything.
We do. Joe has everything that he's written. Um, he's got archived, and so do I. So every year we put away our Sunch. As a matter of fact, I have place here, and I put them in a folder, the assumed, the music we wrote for the year, and even the Portuguese Tribune that explains Carnaval of all the dancers for that year. I tend to put all that together and put it away, and hopefully somebody might get a kick out of it here in about 50 years, 100 years, and say, oh, wow, look at this. It is easier nowadays that there's social media and there's YouTube, and things get recorded in a way that hopefully they can go back and see. But like you mentioned, years and years ago, what'd you go by? Maybe somebody talked about a danza. If you're lucky and you got a photograph, then that would be great. It kind of would solidify the fact that okay, that yeah, this did happen. But there's a lot of things that were not documented or written about that have been lost. So we have our first 20 years we did we have pictures, and we documented all the musicians that played for us and all the actors and the assumed who wrote them. And so we did a pretty decent job of doing that for the first 20 years. Now we have to get caught up on the last 10. So that's a project that hopefully this year we can take care of.
Yeah, I'm actually just you'll see something different, but I'm just sharing people that the government of the Azores has this wonderful page in the Cultura. One of the best archivists and researchers was José Orlando Bretão, who has already passed. He was born in 1939. He was a lawyer by profession, but he did a lot of the archives. By this was a different time, by basically, writing them down, that they had. And I see the documents that there's here, and I'd love for us to put something together here in our community. PBBI could, of course, do its part. Is because you can go to all of these dancers all the way, back here. And again, it doesn't go back a long time, but it does go back to I think if we go back here. We go back to the 1980s and 1970s, and you have the writer, you have the assunto, you click on it, and it's such a wonderful archive that people have. And I think that it would be lovely if we could do the same thing with the groups in California. Because this way, even if someone 25 years from now, as here in the here with this kind of a service, they can go back and they can look at some of these, and maybe they want to, maybe they want to reuse it. Maybe they want to bring it back, like you said, that in the dance of the crianças from Chino used, dois ratões, so to kind of relive that tradition. So this is, I think, it's almost cost prohibitive, as we know in today's world, to kind of publish a book that has 100 assuntos from different dancers throughout California. But I think electronically, and as you mentioned, with social media, I think electronically it would be worthwhile if we could have a registry, especially of the dancers that were written in California, because I think there'll be treasures. I don't know the amount of time, and I don't think you do either, Manuel. But I think there will be treasures. I'll venture to say there'll be true treasures 40 or 50 years from now.
There's probably a good possibility on that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, how many people are going to be writing, in Portuguese, Danças de Carnaval in California 50 years from now? Who knows, But the chances are, if we have only, there's a Hosh and maybe one or two others doing it. I mean, there were a couple of improvisadores that wrote some dancers, as you know, Adeline Toledo wrote some dancers, and a couple others. But it has been a whole bunch of people.
Can I mention something? Because I said Joe was mainly the one writing here. For danças de Chipiada, we had Daniel Arruda, and
right.
I'm sorry that I did not bring his name up because he did write very many danças de Chipiada on that day. So that was a misspeak on my part. And Danielle wrote for us as well, as many as Artesian, many San Jose dancers. So yeah, there are at this time there aren't many, but there have been some.
There have been a few. Yeah, you have. I think has been in the last 10 years. Has been probably the major player. But I believe, as you said, Daniela Huda. I know that Adeline Toledo wrote some dances for the Turlock area. I don't know if anybody else down in South, have written some. Some of the improvisadores, the cantoria singers, who know how to rhyme, are usually, pretty good at and have written a few of them. But I think it's a treasure that we need to keep. Nowadays most of your dances, I'm sure, are recorded, whether on audio or video. But it would be great to have also the registry, and it's a project that I think we should all work together to preserve what's going on, to preserve and to continue this tradition that you and so many others have worked so tirelessly in the last 30 plus years, but also to preserve, because we don't know what's going to happen 40 or 50 years from now. And even if they continue, and even if they are in another language, as your wife, one of the questions that I put forth said, hey, although as much as I love Portuguese, how do I know that maybe in 10 years from now there won't be a dance in English? I don't know that. And so even if they do move into the language that our children and our grandchildren speak on a daily basis, they're treasures. They'll especially be treasures because they won't be in the same language. So I think hopefully we can get together and all of us, come up with a plan to put forth this idea of registering this rich history, because it is a part of who we are.
Right. That'd be a great idea. I agree. And if we can help in any way, then we'll be more than happy to help out. And if they really can't understand what was written, maybe AI can help them out. So we're getting into that, but at least it'll be documented. That would be nice.
That's true. That's true. Who knows if AI will be doing the next Dança de Carnaval? That would be kind of interesting to see a Dança de Carnaval done by AI. But hey, it's being used by scientists and labs and everything else, as you know. Well, Manuel, it was a pleasure talking to you. I promised you around an hour. We went a little bit over. Thank you so much for explaining. I hope that those who have bombarded me, in the good sense of the word, questions, got your answers. If you have any others, please send them to me, and I'll be more than happy to, if I don't know the answer, to forward an email to Manuel, and I'm sure he can help us out. He's always willing to help the community in this forever endeavor of trying to keep who we are and some of our cultural presence. So on behalf of PBBI from Fresno State, Manuel, thank you so much for the time. Thank you so much for your knowledge. Thank you so much for your talent. Thank you so much for your many hours of community service in and not just Carnaval and music and in other organizations as well. And kudos to you for all you've done and to your group.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for the invite. And hopefully we'll see some of those people who are watching this in a hall come next Carnaval. That would be great.
Indeed, indeed, and that's and unfortunately, because as you mentioned, there's less people and there's less places. That's something else that was, I don't know, but years ago, Modesto, for example, was opening their halls. There's less. Is there less halls, or or is just a perception on
This
my
year
part?
there was less halls, yes. In there was in Turlock area was just Turlock, and in San Jose was just one hall. So there's less halls, and it seemed like there's a little bit less people too. But we just try to tell people, make them aware. One funny thing is, we had a few practice here in my garage, and my neighbor would ask, "Oh, you had a lot of cars outside." I said, "Yeah, well, we're having some rehearsals for Carnaval," and I explained to him what it was. "Oh, that's very interesting." I go, "Well, as a matter of fact, we'll be performing here on Saturday at Tuarangrens." Well, when we got off stage, we're in a big hurry to get all our equipment and get out. And as I was rushing through the hall, I hear, "Hey, Manuel," I look to the right, and my neighbors, who they're both Mexican, husband and wife, were there watching the dances, and they said they had a really good time. And I said, "Do you understand anything?" They said, "Well, there's a lot we didn't, but there's a lot that we also did understand." But they enjoyed all the music and they enjoyed the acting and everything. So it was really neat to have them there. So
Sure, sure. We need to open up to more audiences, whether they be Portuguese or not. Indeed. Thank you,
yeah,
Manuel. Take care. And again, my pleasure. And thank you for being part of this. We
you're welcome. Have a good night.
On behalf of PBBI from Fresno State, thank you all for joining us. Take care, and we appreciate your support. Take care, everyone.